I recently got it into my head to start a project, which is a little hard to explain and something I'll cover in a later video, but the relevance is that it's going to involve a lot of pixel art. Anyone who's watched my channel for a while will be aware that art isn't exactly my strong suit, so I started hitting YouTube and watching tutorials on making pretty images out of tiny squares. My search soon led me to a YouTuber called Brandon James Greer, and that led me to a couple of videos on, quote, 1-bit pixel art.
Well, there's also something called 1-bit, and it's essentially a fancy way of saying black and white pixel art.
Now, if like me, at the time, you don't know what 1-bit pixel art is basically regular pixel art, but you're only allowed to use 2 colours. Needless to say, it's a quite restrictive medium. I started googling 1-bit pixel art, mostly out of curiosity, and soon came across an upcoming game jam being hosted by Aspect Manufacture. The rules were simple enough: make a game in 3 days using only 2 colours, some optional themes that would eventually become mandatory, but the main point was the colours, 2 of them, no more. On a whim, I decided to enter the jam. I've recently developed something of an addiction to the retro-inspired fantasy console Pico 8, and this seemed like a perfect opportunity to do something with it. I had roughly a week before the start of the jam. Obviously, I couldn't start making anything until it kicked off, but I didn't want to waste any jam time thinking up game ideas, so I started brainstorming what my game was going to be. The themes were radioactivity, reflections, and dragons, and as I said, the themes were optional to begin with, but after much discussion with the people who were entering the jam, the organisers decided to make the themes mandatory, but let you choose which one of the themes, or all of the themes, that you wanted to work into your game. I had a good long think and settled on reflections, as that seemed like the best opportunity for some kind of quirky game mechanic. After scribbling a bunch of random rubbish on graph paper for a few evenings, I landed on an idea I liked. The idea was a basic puzzle platformer. I decided to go panel-based because it would make coding the game a little bit easier, and the player would have this mystical ability to switch to a, quote, mirror world. Some level elements would only exist in the mirror world, and some level elements would only exist in the real world. The player would have to seamlessly switch between the 2 worlds to get through the level. It wasn't exactly a revolutionary gameplay mechanic, but hey, it's a game jam. My main goal was to have a game at the end that felt complete. It might be short, it might be terrible, but I didn't want anything to feel unfinished. That was my goal for this game jam. Time zones conspired to have the jam start at 6 AM on a Friday for me, which wasn't ideal, as I promised that I would do a stream of the first few hours, so it was a bit of an early start. Surprisingly, things didn't go that badly. There was a couple of false starts for the stream, maybe I should have done a proper test run first, but it didn't look nearly as ridiculous as I thought it might, and there was even a good amount of chatter going on. Typical, I could do with somebody who knows Pico in the chat telling me what I'm doing wrong here, but instead I've got Red Cube and Professor DJ. I streamed for 2.5 hours and reached a point where I was facing a good few hours of tedious trial and error coding and fumbling at pixel art and stuff that wasn't going to be fun to watch, so I ended the stream and carried on coding all by my lonesome. I spent most of the day coding until I finally had to take a break to do some real work, because I've still got to pay bills, and lost a whole day entirely. You see, I'm a freelance writer for a living, and most of the time I have to go looking for work, but every so often I make a good enough impression on a client that when they next come to need something writing, they come directly to me, which is great. This usually happens once or twice a week, because obviously people don't need things writing constantly all the time, but this particular weekend, it happened a lot. In fact, I had an inbox full of direct requests asking me to write things, and a lot of them were urgent, like they needed it within 24 hours. So, I mean, obviously I could have turned the work down, but unfortunately, I've got to pay bills. So I ended up writing until 4 o'clock in the morning, taking a few hours sleep, and then writing some more. All in all, I lost about 25 hours of my 72 hours, so naturally I was eager to get back into it once the last job was submitted. I spent the rest of that day getting the basic game mechanics sorted. I implemented the mirror world mechanic, which initially involved flipping the level entirely. Unfortunately, this was a horrible thing to play. After not much time at all, I abandoned the flipping mechanic instead and settled for just making the mirror world look as though it was being viewed through a mirror. I managed to catch up on my missed sleep that night and started the final day of the jam quite fresh. The game mechanics were serviceable now, so I decided to focus the last day on just making levels. If I had time, I'd polish the game mechanics up some more and maybe add some artwork, but for now it was all about getting some levels down. I submitted the game around 3 AM my time, about 3 hours before the deadline. I'd spent the last few hours adding more artwork to the levels and utterly failing to fix a problem where the regular level music and the mirror level music started over when you switched between the two, which became very annoying as you had to switch between the two quite a lot. Side note, the music in question was made by my friend Dormius, who is also the person who I make the fantastic Mr. Fox music that I released earlier this year? Or it could have been last year? The lockdown has completely messed up all sense of time. So if I can get him to give me a link to something, I will put it in the description, but if not, there is also the fantastic Mr. Fox thing to check out. He did a great job with the music. But anyway, for a 72-hour game that was made in 48 hours, using a restrictive style I'd never tried before, written in a gaming environment that I've only been using for a month, I consider the end result to be a resounding success. The fact that it came in first place was just the icing on the cake. So that was my experience of joining a game jam on a whim and winning it. Without further ado, here is a complete playthrough of the entirety of the game, all 40 seconds of it. So I hope you enjoyed this quite different video for this channel, and if you want to play the game there will be a link in the description as well as a link to Aspect Manufacture and the jam itself if you want to see any of the other entrants. And as always, I'll just thank my Patreons. So thanks to all the Patreons of course, but special thanks to the Patreons who are on the Sugar Daddy / Mama level is Dave Maldine, Michael Gulak, Reg Reed and Julio Montero. You guys are amazing. So I will be back quite soon with another Peak 08 video, and then I think we're going to be following up with a 7 days video. Thanks again, bye bye.